AM radio, an op-ed column, and Fox News is not enough. I want a center-right nation to fight for its soul, and its soul is represented in the arts. Its soul is represented in a world in which media is everything. AM radio is the lowest form of communication. It's tinny, it's not robust, it's not Avatar. I want Avatar. I want the right to enter the world of media to the extent and invest in media the way that the left does.
The fake media is trying to silence us, but we will not let them, because the people know the truth. The fake media tried to stop us from going to the White House, but I'm president and they're not.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast, a Breitbart.com podcast. The podcast starts now. Here's Curt with today's headlines.
Morning, guys. Welcome to the first ever Curt Schilling Podcast. For those of you Whatever It Takes fans, this is what the show has morphed into. Very concentrated, focused 1 hour on the hottest topics, the big headlines, and each podcast will feature hopefully one, if not two, great guests. This first one is as good as it gets in my mind. I got New York Times bestselling author and constitutional attorney Mark Smith. His new book, #Duped, How the Anti-Gun Lobby Exploits the Parkland School Shooting and How Gun Owners Can Fight Back. It's out today. He'll be joining me as my first guest. And the second guest today will be the one and only Sheriff David A. Clarke. We're going to talk at length with Sheriff Clarke about everything from North Korea to the insanity at the border. We'll kick off every day with our headlines, the most important things that I think are going on, the most relevant things. And I'm going to preface all this by saying this. For those of you that are listeners or followers from Whatever It Takes, you know this. For those of you that might be new and don't know me, I got to give you a couple upfront things. First off, I will never, ever, ever lie to you. I might not like what I'm saying. I might not like what I'm hearing, but I won't lie to you. I'm going to give you my opinion. I'm a Constitution-loving, NRA lifetime member, son of a serviceman and a family that served. I love my country. I love this country. I despise what's happening to my country, and I've decided that sitting on the sidelines is no longer an option. So there's so few places now to get truth. There's so few places to get news. Laugh all you want, liberals. When you say Breitbart, they cringe because they know we are one of the few places left. Other than Drudge, I'm not sure where else you go to get true news. And I'm not talking about opinion. I'm talking about news, about stuff that's happening. And I would argue that omission is as bad as lying. And the media is lying by omission. The stuff that they're telling you, much of it is not stuff that you and I care about. Much of it is what they want us to care about, and much of it is from a perspective that is either skewed radically left or just untrue. Hence the term fake news, and fake news does apply. There's no doubt in my mind. I think fake news is a nice term for what we're dealing with. I think they're liars. I think the Fourth Estate has given away all pretense of objectivity. They're liars. They're manipulators. We saw that during the election. We've seen that during the last 2 months, and it makes me wonder how much we missed before this because it's there. But kicking off today, the big three for me today, the Inspector General report, the insanity going on at the borders, and North Korea. So kicking off the first thing, and I'll talk with both guests today about this briefly, is the Inspector General's report, which basically absolves President Trump from any wrongdoing about anything ever, which is, we knew that freaking 18 months ago. I mean, we didn't need the tens of millions of dollars of a corrupt group of people investigating someone who they wanted to be corrupt. That same group of people who tried to rig an election, the American presidential election. And, you know, I say that as if I'm talking about, you know, a Saturday morning box score, but the gravity of that has been lost. I mean, we had the highest of high law enforcement agencies, the FBI, the CIA, all of these groups were in at some capacity, and we know that. We're not guessing. we've been told the Clinton Foundation, the FBI, Fusion GPS, Comey, Lynch, Rice, Holder, Obama, Strzok, Page, Mueller, McCabe, Clapper, all of them conspired to rig a presidential election, which shows you just how putrid the candidate the Democrats elected to run was. Hillary Clinton was so bad she couldn't rig she couldn't win a rigged election, and it'd be almost like an umpire calling all of my pitches strikes and me still finding a way to lose the game. That just seems impossible to happen. But it happened because many of the people listening to this podcast did something about it. And the power of the people, I think, was never more evident in this country than it was during the 2016 election. That came on the heels of Brexit, which is, I think, the kickoff of this nationalist movement around the globe to defeat globalism, which is, at the heart and soul of everything the left wants to be, from the EU to George Soros to Hillary Clinton's hemispherical borders, all of it. Anyway, the Inspector General's report came out, and I want you to listen to Wall Street Journal columnist Kimberly Strassel, who was on Tucker Carlson Friday, and I want you to listen very closely. Please pay attention, because this is the big thing. As conservatives, the words matter to us. Pay attention to some of the things that she claims from the Inspector General report from an implication perspective. Just listen up.
Most of the headlines today have been focused on Jim Comey, and there's no question that this was a very damning indictment of his leadership while he was there. But then again, Democrats and a lot in the media would like to pin it all on him. What struck me was that this report was a searing indictment of the entire FBI and its culture. And in particular, this argument that they tend to live by a rule that they themselves craft, that they impose rules on everyone else, but they do not live by them. So, I mean, we have examples in here of, employees using their home computers and cell phones for work business. We found out that Comey's entire staff was complicit in helping him conceal from his Department of Justice superiors the contents of that July press conference about Hillary Clinton. We have unauthorized contacts with the press. We have an Assistant Attorney General, Peter Kadzik, who not only was tipping off the Clinton team about internal things while he was working on the investigation, but then when he was made to recuse himself, did not abide by the recusal. We've got Andrew McCabe leaking and then lying about it to the FBI agents who questioned him. So this is a widespread problem, at least in the leadership across the FBI, and that was an important aspect of this report that's being missed.
If you need to stop the podcast right here and rewind that and go back and listen to that again. Listen to that until you get or grasp the understanding of what she's saying. These people committed felonies. The FBI revealed state secrets to a presidential candidate to help that candidate beat the other candidate. The FBI conspired with a presidential candidate to beat another presidential candidate in a Democratic election. I don't understand why that isn't the biggest story in the history of politics. This makes Watergate look like shoplifting a Butterfinger. It's a joke. And then you have so fast forward that you have Christopher Wray, and I want to jump on him in just a minute. But I want you to listen. Trey Gowdy, who I've been incredibly disappointed in, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee. I think he's fallen far short of what I was expecting, much like Jeff Sessions. I'm not seeing what I wanted to see from them. But listen to Trey Gowdy on Fox News again Friday night talk about what hit him hardest in this report. Listen up.
What a dark day it is for the FBI and the DOJ, two institutions our country desperately needs. We desperately have to be able to have confidence in them. And this level of bias and animus, not only did he want to stop the Trump campaign, he wanted to stop the Trump presidency. This is an FBI. Peter Strzok, the FBI agent who was on Hillary Clinton's investigation and arguably the lead Russia investigator, not only wanted to stop his campaign, but once he won, got on the Mueller probe because he wanted to impeach him. That is a level of animus and bias that everyone should reject. And Chris Wray, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Chris, there are consequences. The consequences are that your fellow citizens question whether or not they can have confidence in the world's premier law enforcement agency, and that's coming from somebody who's defended them a lot throughout his career. This was a bitterly disappointing report.
he's not mistaken. He has been out front defending the FBI, much to many conservatives' chagrin, certainly mine, where I don't believe they deserve to be defended. But the most important word in his entire commentary right there was a four-letter word, starts with B, ends in S. It is bias. We were told, if you guys can, I equate the two very similar. If you remember the Comey press conference, when he laid out a laundry list of crimes committed by Hillary Clinton and people associated with Hillary Clinton, and he ramped it up to the end where he basically, we were all waiting for the guillotine to drop, and he said, but no reasonable person would prosecute. And we all kind of sat there open mouthed, like, are you kidding me? Very much the same thing here with this IG report. Everything in it, every motivation in it, every act in it was driven by political bias. Political bias was the reason behind all of the actions, all of it. And again, this is liberals. This is left-leaning, radically left, hard left people just basically calling us stupid. Here's all the evidence, but guys, it's not really that bad when we hear it. No political bias. The entire thing was driven by political bias, and that to me, I want to see the perp walk. I want to see Trey Gowdy. I want to see Peter Strzok and was it Lisa Page. I want to see Comey. I want to see them in prison. What they did was treason. They tried to rig a presidential election, and for 2 years they told us, without a doubt, that there was massive. I remember Adam Schiff, that clown, coming out and talking about all the evidence. There was no evidence. Trey Gowdy said he interviewed all 70 of the witnesses, and there was not one word, not one iota, not one sentence ever uttered that implicated Donald Trump in anything illegal, much less collusion. And then we found out that it was the Dems. So it's embarrassing, and I certainly want to talk to Sheriff Clarke about that as well. The next big one for me is right now is this insanity going on at the border. You have people on the left. I wrote a blog post. I do a blog on it's on WordPress. It's called 38 Pitches, and yesterday I wrote an article about the word Nazi, and I had an epiphany. Really thinking about the use of the word Nazi and how it's become so commonplace and just in everyday speak with everybody. You're a Nazi, you're a Nazi. It's the left's default position. Anything you do that they don't agree with makes you a racist and a Nazi. And it's diminished and demeaned what evil Nazi, what Nazi really means. And I realized that the difference between conservatives and Republicans, or conservatives and Democrats and conservatives and liberals is, as a conservative, I have to accept the fact that people that have the actual Nazis, I have to accept the fact that they can live in my country. As much as I don't like it, as much as I despise the KKK and the Aryan Nation and the white pride and all those repulsive people, I have to accept the fact that my Constitution gives those people the same legal rights I have. As mean-spirited, as hateful, as repulsive as they are, if they abide by our laws, they can live here. If they're legal American citizens, they can live here. I accept that. That's where Nazism comes into play for a conservative. On the Democratic side, on the liberal side, the liberals want our government to act like the Third Reich of the 30s. They want our government to be able to dictate how much money you can earn, who you have to give it. They actually want you to give it to them to redistribute. They want to be able to silence you if they don't agree with your opinion. They want to be able to take your guns away. Let's make no mistake about this, okay? And we'll talk to Sheriff Clarke about this. If an amendment landed on the desks tomorrow, or a legislation was in the Senate tomorrow, to take away the Second Amendment, every single Democrat, 90+% of them, would sign it. In confidence, I think 100% would sign it in secret. So, yes, they do want to take away our guns. It's not – so here's the thing. They want to take them away, but they're not going to be able to, okay? And if you ask people of Deerfield, Illinois, where one of the upper courts just refused the law, Deerfield, Illinois was going to make owning an AR-15 a crime. Now, this is not a government buyback. This is government confiscation. It's happening already in this country. It's happened in California. You've had veterans in California who have had no-knock warrants and been visited by police officers and the local police and had their weapons confiscated because they've checked the wrong box on a government form. Basically, the Obama administration made not being able to financially support yourself as an elderly veteran, grounds for taking away your firearms. Basically, that was allowing them to call you insane or mentally unfit. So it just, listen, it's insane. We're going to talk about this border insanity thing in just a few minutes. We're going to take a short break. We will be back in just a second.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlowe.
Jeannie in Pennsylvania.
I think we've gotten away from what we really hired him to do, which is draining the swamp. If you look at the real picture of draining a swamp, you go in and you take all the water out of it. What does it leave? It leaves the gunk. He cannot get rid of the gunk. We have to get rid of the gunk. Everything he's doing, he's lowering the water so we can see who needs to go. The only way they can go is if we vote them out.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Patriot 125.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back. I'm with New York Times bestselling author and constitutional attorney and former semi-professional baseball player whose new book, #Duped, How the Anti-Gun Lobby Exploits the Parkland School Shooting and How Gun Owners Can Fight Back. It launches today. Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me on again. It's an important week. We have the mainstream media is going to be spending a lot of time this week talking about the importance, supposedly, of gun control. And I wanted to write this book, #Duped, to talk about how the mainstream media and the elites of America are using these Parkland school shooter survivors, a handful of them at least, to advance gun control at the expense of ordinary Americans and their families. And that's why I wrote, Duped, for the people that believe in American freedom and the right to protect yourselves against the predators out there.
Karma is a wonderful thing. I read a report. I didn't know about it. In 1995, there was a report put out by, I believe it was I think it was the CDC, 2.46 million annual defensive gun uses by law-abiding citizens. Annual. Every year. It never got publicity. It never got press. It was something I found out about, obviously, later. Then Professor Clarke at Florida, at FSU, wrote a report, and I think he said something to the effect of 1.48 million defensive guns. Anyway, it's millions. This morning, about 15 minutes ago, I saw on Fox News that an armed law-abiding citizen stopped a carjacking with a firearm and against a criminal who was armed. And it just, the good guy with a gun stops the bad guy with the gun is very simple and very, very true. Yet we're watching the left. And I said this earlier in the podcast. If you put legislation on a desk in D.C. tomorrow and there was a secret vote and that legislation repealed the Second Amendment, I believe that 90+% of Democrats would sign it. And so when they say they don't want to take your guns, the fact of the matter is they do. They're not going to, and they can't, but they want to. And anybody that doesn't think so is just not paying attention.
That's right. And, as I write in Duped, the reality is the 1%ers, the elites, the Michael Bloombergs of the world that can protect themselves and their families with any means available. Guess what they select? They pick guys with guns. What's the point of the guns? Why is it that 100% of law enforcement agencies in the United States who are trained professionals to protect lives and property, why do they all select guns to do so? What's the point of the guns? Because we know at the end of the day, if you ignore what the leftists say, but you look at what the leftists do, they all pick guns. But you're right. Many people on the left, look, they trust government and deep state over ordinary people. I tend to trust ordinary people over government bureaucrats. And at the end of the day, even though I like police and I'm a supporter of law enforcement, the reality is if I encounter a predator, a criminal, a terrorist today, I'm going to have to deal with it first. I'm really, Curt, my first, right, really, we are our own first responders because we're the ones that encounter the criminals first, and then we call 911, and the police show up second. So I always think, and I write about this in the book Duped, that police are not actually first responders. They're the second responders. We as ordinary people who encounter the criminals first, are really the true first responders. So shouldn't we have the same means to defend ourselves and our family and our community as the so-called first responders that really come second? And that's what I write about in Duped. And, of course, the left and people that support government like Deep State, they don't believe in that. They actually think that the only people that can be trusted with guns are government workers. But as we saw, and I write about this in the book, down in Parkland, that's a classic example of how government will not protect you. There were numerous instances of government being aware of Nicholas Cruz as a potential school shooter. The FBI did nothing. The administration did nothing. Then basically Nicholas Cruz was allowed to shoot up the school because no one did their job in Parkland, which goes back to the point, Curt, that we have to be our own defender because no one will be there for us at the end of the day other than ourselves.
And let's add to the fact that over the last 2 years, how many times have you heard local law enforcement say, I would rather you have a legally owned firearm on your hip than 911 on the phone? And recognizing they can't be everywhere all the time, recognizing that in a school shooting, you're talking about seconds, not minutes, seconds, where separate being alive from being dead. And Mark, here's my question. At some point, does the left ever get to the place where everyone else in the world is, which is if you can't stop a shooter from walking on school grounds with an illegally owned firearm, which you can't unless you turn them into prisons. If you can't do that, what's the next step in protecting these kids? Because in my opinion, after 9/11, what we did to our airports is exactly what we should do to our schools. You harden the target. You make it next to impossible to get in, but you allow for someone getting in, and when they do, there is an armed responder. The only way to stop a shooter from killing kids is to kill the shooter. Well,
yes. Again, good guns are used to stop bad people from doing bad things all the time. That's why, and as I write about in the book Duped, where you see these mass shootings are always in gun-free zones, right? You never see a mass shooting at a police station. You never see a mass shooting at a gun range. They always go to churches that are gun-free zones. They go to shopping centers with gun-free zone, labels on them, or they go to schools that are gun-free zones. That's the reality of it. And while the people that perpetrate these crimes, they know this. So these gun-free zones are magnets for bad people to do bad things to good people. And, Curt, you obviously are a Hall of Famer, and you deserve to be in the Hall of Fame for baseball. Just think about when you were pitching. Now, you were surrounded with police at every stadium, and yet you know that people, if they really want to jump on the field and run around the outfield and run around and do stupid stuff, the cops can't stop them. There's just not enough cops relative to the people in the stands. And I think that's a very good metaphor that even if you have police presence, if somebody really wants to go out there and do something, they can get past the police initially, and you need to be able to protect yourself against that. And even though the police do a great job and they work hard usually, and they try to be there, the reality is they can't get there all the time. But it's even worse than that, Curt. You know what happened down in Parkland, of course, is that when the firemen, after the shooting started to take place with Nicholas Cruz, the firemen and the paramedics wanted to go into the building and save lives. And what did one of the captains in the Parkland police force do? She prevented the EMTs and the fire department from going into saving lives because she said it was too dangerous, and she kept them out. So even when the police are there, guess what? They often don't do their jobs right. And you, again, have to protect yourself because even if police try to protect you, they can't always do so.
You and I understand the common sense message. Guns are a deterrent to bad people, not an incentive, a deterrent. Because if you put an armed criminal in front of two doors, and behind one door there's 25 kids and a school teacher, and behind the other door there's 25 kids, a school teacher, and an armed guard, you're going to take the first door every single time. It really, honestly, here's the thing, Mark, it is that simple. And we always say only a good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy with the gun. The left hates that, but they try to make it a more complicated message. They muddy the waters by saying ban assault rifles, not knowing that assault rifles are illegal anyway. There is no way for a law-abiding citizen to get an assault rifle except under extreme circumstances for thousands and thousands of dollars. The AR-15 is a weapon no soldier would be caught dead with, or would be caught dead with, actually. But they've confused everybody, and now you have the David Hoggs of the world who CNN gives carte blanche to say and do things that do nothing but show their ignorance of the actual laws. Here's the thing, Mark. Common sense gun control. That's the big phrase we hear from them. I never ever hear anything after the word control. I don't hear what that means to them because all of the things that they say, Mark, already are in effect. They're already laws.
That's right. And of course, as I write about specifically in the book Duped, I discuss how there's plenty of ways to kill people without guns, right? They use box cutters on 9/11. They use, van violence, car violence, knife violence, bricks. And did you see what's going on in Israel now is they're literally flying flaming kites into Israel to attack. So now you can use kites. But what's interesting to show you the propaganda here is while you always read about gun violence, you never read about van violence or car violence or kite violence or knife violence.
No, the other point there, and it's so true, you don't read about the van, you read about the driver. You don't read about the knife, you read about the person wielding it. You don't read about the hammer or the brick, you read about the person. But when it comes to gun crimes, you never hear about the shooter, you only hear about the gun.
That's right. And of course, if you look at like the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, which are obviously a group of people that are anti-guns, they conflate people that use guns for suicides with gun homicides.
Right.
And essentially 66% of gun-related deaths every year in the United States are suicides. But as we've learned from Kate Spade, unfortunately, you don't need to kill yourself with a gun. And as I point out in the book in great detail, places like Japan that don't have guns have higher rates of suicide because if you want to kill yourself, you can. And I'm always perplexed because, the left is big proponents of the right to die, right? They know if you want to take your life, go ahead. But for some reason, when it comes to guns, they seem to switch their position here and say, oh, well, we have to blame the guns for people that decide to kill themselves. So, of course, the reality is people, when they go to the mall, are not worried about getting killed by people trying to commit suicide. They're worried about murderers and criminals. And, the left and the CDC and these others try to make guns look more dangerous in society than they really are by conflating suicide statistics with homicide statistics. And, of course, as you pointed out, they ignore all of the lives saved with guns every year. And, I discuss in Duped, I give them a great information for people talking to, with their liberal family and whatnot, or their liberal friends that are anti-gun or don't know what to think about guns, that the Department of Justice has concluded that at a minimum every year 67,000 people, this is a minimum number, at least 67,000 people a year use guns to defend themselves in crimes. Now, I want to put that 67,000 number in perspective. 35,000 people a year die in cars every year, okay? 35,000 people a year die in car accidents. Twice that number protect their lives using guns. And yet this kind of basic analysis is ignored by the mainstream media and by the government because, frankly, they don't want us to have guns because they're the government. They're always going to have guns, right? That's what they think. They will always have guns. They will always be able to hire the guns. They will always be surrounded by law enforcement. We're the ones that they want to deny having guns. They don't want to deprive themselves of guns. And I go through an entire list of celebrities who have bodyguards but also support gun control.
Right.
Top of the list, of course, is Oprah and George Clooney. But the list is very long, and I provide the entire list for the readers of the book Duped.
The CDC did a study in the 90s, and again, I'm not sure if you've seen this, but it was never made public. And in that survey, that they did, they found nearly 2.5 million defensive uses of guns a year. And then Professor Gary Clarke came out and did one as well. But the fact of the matter is, far more guns are used to save lives than take lives. And finally, let me just ask you this. I'm going to have the new president of the NRA, Colonel North, on this week. The NRA, I keep saying this. I am the NRA. I'm a lifetime member. I'm a law-abiding citizen. The NRA is made up of, well, it's a growing number thanks to the left, millions and millions of the most law-abiding citizens in this country. They have made the NRA out to be something they aren't. First off, the NRA spends millions of dollars a year in gun safety, in all of the things around teaching and advocacy for gun safety. The NRA supports politicians and gives money to politicians who defend our Second Amendment rights. And somehow that's turned into the NRA murders children and gives money to people who sell guns. And they've hijacked it, and I don't know. I feel like almost at Breitbart, your book is an outlier. The getting that book into publication has become a challenge because no one wants that message to get out. The message you're telling, the truth you're telling, people are continuing to try and hide.
I think that's right, and you're right. The NRA has saved more lives with their hunter and gun safety courses than any anti-government, any anti-gun person has ever done. I agree with you. But you're right. What's happened here after the Parkland school shooting was that you had a handful of young students who basically became the face for the old-fashioned, old-line anti-gun left. And that's David Hogg and some of these others. Now, the benefit they have is that every single mainstream media, whether it be Jimmy Fallon on down the line, props them up as representative of their classmates across the country. But here's the reality of this, and I discuss this in the book, #Duped. I point out that on the day in March when there was the school walkouts, some number of tens of thousands of students walked out in support of gun control. That's out of the 15 million high school students in the United States, which means less than 1% of the high school students in the United States walked out in support of gun control. But if you read the newspapers, it was like, students demand action. They demand gun control. Look at this great movement. But the reality was it's no movement. As I talk about in the book, Duped, it's really just astroturf. They try to make it look like a movement with all their earned media associated with going on, the major networks and the like. But the reality is it's a handful of students that are typical liberals.
I got to close it up. But, Mark, isn't that always the case? The vocal minority is always getting 100% of the media's attention. The book is called #Duped, How the Anti-Gun Lobby Exploits the Parkland School Shooting and How Gun Owners Can Fight Back. Mark W. Smith, thank you, sir. Love to have you back.
Thanks, Kurt.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
A lot of people not knowing what action they could or should take to make the difference. What I do is try to turn people on to sites like Breitbart, people who are writing and publishing the truth so that people will get educated. But, you kind of can't blame productive members of society who are kind of confused, perplexed as to what do we do to take this government back.
Sirius XM Patriot, Channel 125. We want to hear from you. Tweet the show at Garrick38. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Joining me now is someone who I have had the honor of meeting in person, a man who is served this country his entire life. He is, to me, the definition of what a conservative is and should be. He's at the tip of the spear, literally, on all of this stuff. He is retired Sheriff David A. Clarke. Good morning, Sheriff. How are you, sir?
Kurt, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for asking. Hello to your listeners.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. First off, I mentioned this. This morning in Washington, the state of Washington, a law-abiding, gun-owning citizen stopped a criminal who had a firearm. I'm going to guess he had it illegally. And it was another, what they call DGU, defensive gun use, a law-abiding citizen doing that. And I want to bring that up. First of all, I know that happens more than people want to believe it happens. I'm curious how often you ran across that during your time in uniform.
Well, a few times. Wisconsin didn't enact concealed carry until about maybe 5 years ago or so. So we were seeing a lot, but you're seeing more and more of it, even throughout the country. And I'm glad to see it because people have the right and the need to defend themselves. And when government can't do it, they have to provide the citizen the tools, in this case, the Second Amendment, with which to defend themselves. The crooks have always had the upper hand, but now they have something else to think about, that the person that they're going to accost might be armed and able to defend themselves. So when I see that kind of stuff, I'm heartened.
I want to get down to south of the border. I want to. This is a big thing this week. I continue to ask, as liberals both lie and add and create stories that don't exist and aren't true. There's some 2,000 kids who have been separated from their families because their families have committed a crime, which is what happens in this country. I've never heard, and maybe you can help me, I've never heard of someone being arrested and sent to jail and being able to take their children. Now, I don't believe that happens here.
Oh, you're correct. And look, this is a political calculation by the left and by the lying liberal media. Look, in politics, you have to control narratives in order to win public persuasion, and the left is very good at it, especially with their youth when they exploit people's emotions. And that's what they're doing here. Look, they're trying to drive up the women vote for. Saying that if they put some weepy little child up on a picture front page of all these newspapers, that it's going to appeal to the hearts of, mainly moms. But it's propaganda. It's their narrative, the left's narrative on this is based on lies.
Are voting liberals really? I don't know what any other word to use. Ignorant, naive. Because I mentioned this because I said a name this morning on Breitbart. I was doing the morning show. Elian Gonzalez. And immediately everybody flashes back to that photo of the SWAT team member pulling this kid. That was under Clinton. That was under presidential. That was what the law. I don't remember any liberals going bonkers over that. I don't remember them going crazy over that. I remember the Obama administration, the media posting pictures of, and by the way, I despise that they say this word, concentration camps that actually aren't. These kids are being taken care of. They're being fed. They're being schooled. All the things you can do. But they control the media narrative, so we don't get to tell the truth.
Well, we do. There's outlets such as yours. There's blogs. There's social media now, and you just have to pound back. Watch me on Twitter. I make very effective use on Twitter. I put something up this morning that the Democrat Party in the 60s, with the creation of the welfare state, destroyed and separated the black family, and they didn't have any problem doing that. But now all of a sudden, they're trying to get people to believe that they're compassionate toward the Latino family. I don't believe it for 1 minute. This is about power politics. It's about political power for the left. So, you have to just keep, and this, but for your listeners, you just have to keep pounding away. And I tell people, don't look back. Don't about whether you're winning or not. Just keep fighting. Next thing you know, you look up and you say, hey, look how far we've come, because you focus more on shooting down and defeating this narrative. Curt, if I thought, curling up in a ball and whining about what the left does with their use of the media, their irresponsible use of the media, if I thought that's what I do, but it won't work. So just keep pounding away. You, others, talk radio. This is how we can counter and defeat that big lie that they're peddling on illegal immigration. I wish the Democrats cared as much about the kids here in the United States, the Americans who are living in poverty, the ones who are living in families with child abuse and sexual abuse. You don't hear much from them about the American kids, but all of a sudden now these people who illegally brought their kids, dragged their kids across, and I literally mean dragged their kids across the border under some dangerous circumstances. As far as I'm concerned, that's child neglect. That's exposing kids to a dangerous environment, and they should be charged criminally for that.
I mean, one of the reasons I moved to a podcast was because Twitter and Periscope, both owned by very liberal companies, are trying their best to do some things, and you've seen it happen to you on Twitter, where they're in effect shadow banning. They're limiting the reach your voice can get, and I don't doubt for a second that at some point Twitter's going to try and shut you down because of the immense following you have. I've seen them do it to ruin people's lives. People that rely on social media to reach people. That's the danger in the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, the masters of the universe being able to control what you read, what you see. Let me just ask you, Sheriff. I watch this border stuff and I see all this, and I wonder, after the Inspector General's report and seeing, Black Lives Matter and the assassinations of police officers, where is our law enforcement, from local law enforcement to the FBI and CIA and NSA, on a trust meter, on a trust scale? I think it's almost gone. And that's a dangerous thing. And obviously you and I both know that the heart and soul of police officers and police departments are good people. They're people that do right. There are millions and millions of daily interactions between citizens, law-abiding citizens, and officers that end in a positive thing. Almost all of them do. The fact of the matter is the amount of distrust that has crept into our society over our law enforcement officials, and now after the Inspector General's report, our government is as corrupt and as deep and as horrible as we ever dreamed it could be. What's next? How do we start to fix this or mend that fence?
There's a lot there. Let me try to pull a few things out of there. First of all, this was a serious breach of the public trust what the FBI and the intelligence community was involved in trying to overturn an election.
Let me ask you this. Do you believe, as I do, that the things that the Inspector General's report pointed out are actual crimes?
Oh, without a doubt. And that's
right.
The thing, though, in Washington, D.C., with the political class, nobody's ever held accountable. You know, they slapped James Comey on the wrist this report by saying that he was insubordinate. Well, what the heck does that mean? Okay, that's a personnel matter inside an agency if you're insubordinate. James Comey's gone. Some of those other people are gone, so there's nothing they can do. So they threw him, you know, as the sacrificial lamb to cover for everything else that went on there. There was some very dangerous stuff. You're right. The trust in government, the federal government, is at an all-time low. I think it's in the negative numbers publicly. You mentioned about what the left and Black Lives Matter tried to do to discredit the police. It was shameful. It was horrible. But I think that at the local level,
it got people killed.
There's more of a trust in government. Sure it did. I think there's more of a trust in local government, local and state government, than there is the federal government. It's been corrupt for a long time, but finally the layers are being peeled back on it. We're starting to see what we've already known. There was nothing at IG's report that we didn't know. There were no bombshell reports, but it just substantiated what we already know. How do you fix it? Well, you know, you got to drain the swamp. Now, I realize that that's just a saying, but, you know, all of these long-time bureaucrats, this deep state.
Right.
The president is starting to do some things on that, cutting back on some of these benefit packages and whatnot for these deep staters. But it's going to take some time. But, you know, with the FBI, you got to clean house, top to bottom.
Hey,
you cannot just get rid of a few people and think that this thing is going to right itself. It won't.
One of my Periscope viewers wanted me to ask you this question, and I honest to God believe it's a legitimate question, considering how much this president is doing on a day-to-day basis. Is POTUS safe? And by that, I mean, do you see him making it to a second election, a second term, and serving a full 8 years without incident? Because it feels to me like the left is backing. It's almost like cornering a possum. They strike out irrationally almost all the time. At some point, I believe that's going to manifest itself into physical action. And I wonder if you think like I do. I worry about President Trump surviving 8 years. Yeah,
well, you know, safety is a relative thing. I believe that the president is safe. I believe that the security that surrounds him is effective to a point. But you're right, we're an open society. I mean, there are still, you know, opportunities. I was at an event in Columbus, Ohio last week where some protesters snuck in to the event and then disrupted the vice president speaking. But, you know, there's an example, for instance, of how people can still get at these individuals. But, you know, the president's aware of this too. Will he make 8 years without something happening? You know, I try to take life one day at a time. You know, I'm worried about today, and then I'll worry about tomorrow.
Right.
And
my question is more angled towards the people that are supposed to protect and provide protection and laws, the FBI. We've learned that they're corrupt, and I guess I'm wondering is he safe from them? Is he safe from the deep state? Because it doesn't feel like he has a lot of wiggle room. It feels like he's on the ledge, and it's not his doing. It certainly is you know, the hatred of our country is becoming very apparent from the left. But that's where I worry about his security and safety is from the deep state more than from John Q. America.
Yeah, if you saw what went on during that with the FBI, with McCabe and Comey and Strzok and Lisa Page and others, it was pretty obvious that they were hell-bent on not allowing Donald Trump to become the 40th president of the United States. And so you have to ask yourself, you know, what are they capable of? I wouldn't put anything past any of these clowns. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. I think the president, though, is a very intuitive man. He understands it. He gets it. I don't think he's being naive about any of this. And I don't think he's being over the top on any of the stuff that he puts out on Twitter about the intelligence community, some of these federal law enforcement agencies. I wouldn't put it past him, but at the same time, he cannot allow that. You live with danger. It's like a law enforcement officer. I live with danger. We accept it. He has to continue to govern and do things that are in the best interest of America, regardless of whether he thinks somebody inside federal government, might attack him or take his life, so on and so forth. That's the danger that a president has to live with.
Hey, listen, I want to ask you something. Another one of my followers wanted me to ask you this question, and I'm going to paraphrase. In light of what we're seeing at the border, and in light of what we're hearing from the left, how can the average American citizen feel safe and secure in a country where illegal aliens literally have more rights and more access to financial security and safety than law-abiding citizens? How did that come to be?
It's amazing that American citizens have become second-class citizens in their own country when it comes to this issue, because of the Democrat Party, because of the liberals, because of the left. How safe can you feel? Not at all. There's no doubt. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But that's why I tell people to be prepared, like the story you gave in Washington State. I'm not saying that anything to do with illegal immigration. I don't know that, but I'm saying be prepared to defend yourself, exercise your rights under the Second Amendment, and protect your family. That's your primary responsibility. It's not the government's role to protect your family. And like I said, you shouldn't outsource it to them anyway.
Right. Hey, listen, Sheriff, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm always honored to have you on, especially given this is my first inning, my first podcast. So thank you. God bless you. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks. DACenterprises.org is where people can keep up with me, my website.
Absolutely. And at Sheriff Clarke on Twitter. Sheriff Clarke, thank you. God bless. Take care. I like this format. It's organized and feels better. I'm going to do winners and losers every day, and I'm gonna. It's something I started on Whatever It Takes. My winner today is Rodney Smith. Rodney Smith is a man who's created a company called Raising Men Lawn Care Service, and he's basically created a 50-yard challenge, and that is for kids across the country to mow 50 yards, elderly citizens and veterans that live in their communities. He is going around the country mowing the yards of these people, and he basically said that there's an article up on Breitbart.com. You can read about it. He basically said that he ran into someone. He had a one-on-one talk with God, and he wanted God to use him, and the meeting he had with an elderly man was that happening. So, Rodney Smith, you're my winner of the day. The loser is repulsive. It could have been Rob Ryan or Rosie O'Donnell. They could win every day. But listen to this. General Michael Hayden, who ran the NSA from 1999 to 2005. He was the CIA director from 06 to 09. General Michael Hayden tweeted a picture of Birkenau. Birkenau was right near Auschwitz. It was one of the places of mass murder in the Nazi regime in the Third Reich during the Second World War. He tweeted a picture of Birkenau, and he compared it to the situation on our border. Now, let's put this into perspective. There are I think the number is some 2,000 kids who have been separated from their parents. And by the way, when you break a law, you don't get to take your kids to jail. And it's not, they're not being chained up and all the things that the left would have you believe. Many of the photos are from the Obama administration. But the comparison here of 2,000 kids being separated from their parents, being compared to over 30 million people were gassed and executed in the Second World War. 30 million. And it goes back to my post on my blog. The left is continuing to water down terminology to the point that it becomes common use. The word Nazi is a great example. The left displays and exhibits all of the traits that the Nazi Party did in the Second World War from a government control perspective. We will get to all of what we missed. Border insanity, North Korea. We'll talk about the Inspector General report. Tomorrow, Dan Bongino, former Navy SEAL, Fox News contributor. He has his own podcast. Please check that out. And he's also an NRA TV host. He's been on the tip of the spear on the battlefield, and he's on the tip of the spear right now, fighting against liberal elites and all this crap. Thank you guys for checking in. This is the start of something big and fun, guys. God bless. Thank you. Have a great day. I will catch up with you tomorrow.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
I want to actually
take a couple of the references to Donald Trump from hip-hop. And then we're going to try to see if we can figure out why they like Donald Trump. Jay-Z said, I'm at the Trump International. Ask for me. Raekwon said, I'm the black Trump. They are comparing themselves to what he represents. His wealth, his achievement. Capitalism.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.